What are we discussing on today's the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Well, it's Hall of Fame week, so let's discuss which current D-backs players have the best chance to be future Hall of Famers and which players on the 2024 Hall of Fame ballot should not be inducted into this year's Hall of Fame class.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day, listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. Today's episode is actually brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, on today's podcast, I want to do a whole Hall of Fame discussion. I want to look at that 2024 ballot and discuss which players I think should not be inducted into this year's class, right? You see a lot of podcasts of people doing their own ballots saying who they think should get in. I'm doing the anti-ballot, who I think should not get in, and we're going to break it down into categories as well, my reasons as why those players should not get in. So we'll talk about that in segment number 2 and number 3, but I want to start off this podcast by doing a fun little brain exercise and discuss which current D-backs players do we think have a chance in their career to be potential future Hall of Famers, because I wrote down 3 D-backs players. I think there's 2 obvious ones, and then I think there's a wild card D-back player of who I think could be a future Hall of Famer. The first guy, of course, Corbin Carroll. He is the dude most likely, if you had to pick a current D-back player who has the highest chance of making it to the Hall of Fame one day, I think Corbin Carroll is a lock to be that guy. Top prospect coming up through the system, can't miss dude, gets called up and immediately, if you go back to 2022, did look good in the 32 game sample size he had, really flashed a lot, 260 average only, but the 830 OPS, 4 home runs in the 32 games, 132 OPS plus. Those 32 games did flash the glove, the speed, a little power in that small sample size he had, but he broke out in a big way. First full season with the D-backs this past year, 2023, and it was a historic rookie season for Corbin Carroll. 25 home runs, 54 stolen bases, first 25-50 rookie in MLB history, led the National League in triples, 800 plus OPS, 280 plus average, 5th in MVP voting. He did it all: defense, offense, speed, power, the ability to hit at the top of the lineup, the ability to drive in runs. Corbin Carroll did it all. And at just the age of 23 years old, Corbin Carroll is by far the pick from this D-backs team that you would have to say has the highest chance of making it to the Hall of Fame one day, with his dynamic ability, with, just considering what he did this past year. If he could be 90% of that for the next 7 to 8 years in his prime, where he still has the speed, if he's 25 to 30 home runs and then 25 to 60, 70 stolen bases for the next 8 to 10 years. And then after that, still a 25 to 30 home run guy, 290 guy, but with diminished speed the second half of his career. Yeah, Corbin Carroll is definitely on Hall of Fame trajectory with the skills he's already put up, with the stats we've already seen him put up. If he can just replicate what he just did this past year, which is a 5th place MVP, type of season, if he could do this a few more times throughout his career, maybe win an MVP once, a couple more times where he finishes runner-up, a few more times finishing in the top 10, another stat padded season like this one, Corbin Carroll definitely has Hall of Fame trajectory written all over him. He is definitely number one in the D-backs power ranking for future Hall of Famers. And then number two, I think, is Zach Gallen, who, when you look at his career year by year, outside of just 2021, where he had a little bit of a down year, that 4.52 ERA really does seem like an outlier 4.3 ERA in 2021 does seem like the outlier. Kind of hurt that year, only pitched 121 innings, but I go by year for Zach Gallen. I mean, really dominant stuff. That first year, 2019, 2.81 ERA. Of course, Zach Gallen started his career with that insane streak of like not allowing more than 2 earned runs in like the first 23 starts of his career. Like Zach Gallen was elite and historic to start his career. 2.81 over 80 innings pitched his first full season. Of course, I was split with Miami. His first half season with the D-backs, I guess you could say, in 2019, over 43.2 innings pitched, 2.89 ERA. Came back, COVID-shortened season 2020, 72 innings pitched, 2.75 ERA. But we still hadn't yet seen a full season of Zach Gallen. We got 2 half seasons of Gallen. We looked absolutely dominant. Then came 2021, the first crack to see a full season of Gallen. He did not look like himself. He was off that whole year, 4.3 ERA, like I just said, dealt with some injuries. And then came roaring back in 2022, dominant, 5th in Cy Young voting. Then this past season, finished 3rd in Cy Young voting. I think he should have, I think he could have won the Cy Young this past season if he didn't hit a wall, 3/4 of the way through the season. But the trajectory Zach Gallen's already on. 2020 finished 9th in Cy Young voting. 2022 finished 5th. This past year finished 3rd in Cy Young voting. I think a Cy Young is coming in Zach Gallen's future. Also got just a sprinkle of MVP votes this past year as well. Zach Gallen is a workhorse. He is as talented as anyone. You could literally say since 2019, he's been a top 3 pitcher in the National League during that time. Zach Gallen is a beast. I don't think he's underrated anymore. I think everyone knows the kind of stud Zach Gallen is. They know he could go deep into ball games. Got that cut fastball that's absolutely nasty. Elite at not walking guys. Really good control. Really good at commanding the strike zone. I don't know what happened in the second half of the season, but win or go home in the World Series. Zach Gallen, no through 6, absolutely dominant. Every D-backs fan loves Zach Gallen. I think he's finally getting the respect he deserves. Started the All-Star game this past year. Zach Gallen at just 27 years of age. With how his career has gone so far, I mean, if he can just keep this pace up, I think he is on Hall of Fame trajectory. It's all about consistent greatness when we talk about Hall of Famers. And if Zach Gallen can be top 5 in Cy Young voting for the next 6 to 9 years of his career, only 27 years of age right now. I guess he turned 28. So only 28 years of age. He can continue this pace he's on until about the age of 35, 36, 37. I think Zach Gallen definitely has a case for the Hall of Fame. Then the last D-backs player that I think has the case for the Hall of Fame, I was trying to maybe decide if Ketel Marte was the third most likely guy from the D-backs after digging through the numbers. He's got career WAR 24. The average career WAR for second basemen is like 60 or something like that. Like, I think Ketel Marte is just probably not close enough to the Hall of Fame trajectory or path he needs to be on unless every year from here on out is a combination of 2019 and 2021. I don't think Ketel Marte has enough runway left in his career to make it to the Hall of Fame. A guy like Alec Thomas, if he turns it on, a guy like Jordan Lawler, the case is still out on him. Brandon Pfaadt, those are young guys that the case is still out on that you could make an argument for. But the young guy that I do think has potential Hall of Fame written on him, based off the first season we saw with the D-backs, I would have to say Gabriel Moreno. Maybe he's not the first choice people would think of, because maybe you would think of like a Jordan Lawler who really didn't have any sample size with the D-backs this past year, but one of those top prospects. Maybe you think of Alec Thomas with his defense, if he can get that bat turned around, or Brandon Pfaadt, who we just saw dominate in the postseason as a youngin. Maybe you pick one of those guys first, but Gabriel Moreno, first full season with the D-backs. The reason I think he could be a potential Hall of Famer is because first full season already, Gold Glover, looked like the best defensive catcher in baseball. Plus, with the fact that he batted 284, I was looking it up. Gabriel Moreno, his first full season with the D-backs this past year, same WAR as Buster Posey's rookie season where he won Rookie of the Year and finished 11th in MVP voting. They both put up a 3.9 WAR. So if Moreno, his first full season, puts up the same WAR as a Buster Posey, then I have to believe Gabriel Moreno has at least a chance of being on that Hall of Fame trajectory as a Buster Posey. I'm not saying he's going to be as good because Posey was one of the best catchers of all time. Posey was an electric offensive catcher and defensive catcher, and maybe maybe Gabriel Moreno offensively can't do the stuff that Buster Posey did, but defensively he definitely can. And through one full season, both of them put up. Actually, now that I'm double checking it, Gabriel Moreno actually had a higher WAR this past season, 4.3, than Buster Posey's rookie year at 3.9. So Moreno already off to a better start in his career than Buster Posey, just according to WAR. Of course, the accolades went to Posey, but according to WAR, you could actually say Moreno had a better rookie season than Buster Posey. And that's why I believe Moreno has Hall of Fame written in his future. Now we'll talk about which guys from the 2024 ballot should not be inducted into this year's Hall of Fame class. But before we get there, I first want to talk to you guys about eBay Motors, because passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to a peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And let's discuss which players on the 2024 Hall of Fame ballot should not be inducted into this year's class. I don't know if this is considered a negative segment, but we always see people and podcast hosts and talk shows do their own ballots, talk about which guys should get in. I'm going to tell you the definitive guys on the ballot who I would not put into the Hall of Fame. These are guys who I have tremendous respect for, who I think were really good baseball players. You don't become eligible for the Hall of Fame unless you're a really good baseball player. But for the sake of credibility for the Hall of Fame, these are the guys that should not be in the Hall of Fame because they are just not on the level of the David Ortizes, the Derek Jeters of the world, the best players of all time. Maybe those are bad examples, maybe not, but these guys I just wouldn't put in the same class as some of the all-time greats, the Nolan Ryans, the Maddoxes, whoever you want to say. These guys I don't think should be in that level. These guys are deserving of the Hall of Very Good, but not the Hall of Fame. So let's get into it. And I broke it down by categories as well to help formulate my thoughts a little bit here. So the first category, this is the player. There's only one player in this category. And I think his Hall of Fame candidacy is linked a lot to the team he was a part of, the brand he was a part of. This is Andy Pettitte of the New York Yankees. Don't get me wrong, Andy Pettitte has some phenomenal postseason moments, but he doesn't get to those postseason moments without being on a great team like the Yankees. And I think a lot of the times when we looked at Andy Pettitte's career, I think what he did in the postseason probably didn't match what he was able to do in the regular season. I think at times he was a better postseason pitcher than he was in the regular season. For his career, Andy Pettitte had a 3.85 career ERA, which is just fine. But a lot of times Andy Pettitte had a season where his career ERA was over 4, or maybe he just was a pretty good pitcher, but he wasn't that elite number one ace. I think Andy Pettitte had himself a hell of a career, but I think a lot of it was due to the fact that he was on the New York Yankees for most of it. If he was on a different team, on a different franchise, I don't know if we would hold Andy Pettitte in the same regard. I think his best years came when he first broke out onto the scene early in his career. Those first few seasons with the Yankees, I mean, he was third in Rookie of the Year his first year, finished second in Cy Young voting his second year, fifth in Cy Young voting his third year. And then after that, a bunch of seasons where he finished fourth or where he finished above 4 in terms of ERA, where he was a good pitcher for a few of those seasons as well, but not that number one ace, not that guy that we saw when he first bursted onto the scene, or the guy that was dominating in some of the postseason matchups. Andy Pettitte, I think, was very good postseason pitcher, but would I put him in the Hall of Fame? I don't think he should be a Hall of Famer. The next category is incredible skill, but didn't last long. There's 2 players I have in this category, but for 2 different reasons. The first guy is Jose Bautista, who had himself a very nice career, but the issue was his career got started pretty late. Jose Bautista is someone that bursted onto the scene at the age of 29. He was in Major League Baseball for a few years prior to that. Like, he broke into the majors at age 23, but wasn't an impact player until age 29, like his 6th, 7th season Major League Baseball, where he went from 13 home runs in 113 games in 2009 to 54 home runs and leading the American League in 161 games the very year after. Steroids, I don't know, never got busted or anything like that, but this whole very mild mid-career, then then all of a sudden in 2010, 54 home runs, 4th in MVP voting. 2011, 43 home runs and 132 walks at 1056 OPS, 3rd in MVP voting. And then 27 home runs, 28 home runs, 35 home runs, 40 home runs. Jose Bautista was as dangerous as anyone from ages 29 to 34. The issue is with Jose Bautista, that skill just didn't last long. A 5-year period where the first half of your career, you were awful. You were incredible the second half career. But I just don't think his peak was long enough. That's why I don't think Jose Bautista is a Hall of Famer. Same with the other guy in this category. For me, Jose Reyes. I think Jose Reyes was one of the most electric and dynamic players early in his career. I mean, the speed was unstoppable from 05 to 07. He led the league in steals every single season. 60 stolen bases, 64 stolen bases, 78 stolen bases. He averaged 45 stolen bases over the course of his career. If you broke it down by 162 games per season, his 162 average was 45 stolen bases. He was a speedster for sure, but as he got older, those speeds just, the speed diminished and his skill diminished as well. I think he peaked at the age of 28. By the time he got traded to the Marlins and the Blue Jays, he was definitely in the decline of his career. He still stole 40 bases in 2012, but by that point, OPS was trending in the wrong direction. Still a very good contact hitter. He still get on base at a pretty good rate as well, but I just don't think a guy who was basically not the same after the age of 29 years old. I just think you need a longer resume than that. And even when he was at his very best, he was a guy that wasn't slugging for a ton of power. Yes, he had a few seasons mixed in there with over an 800 OPS and like the 300 average, the 70 stolen bases, like all that could definitely neutralize some of the power that he didn't have. But overall, I just don't think he was well balanced enough as an offensive player. I think he peaked a little bit too early in his career. Jose Bautista peaked a little bit too late in his career. I think if both those guys, if Jose Reyes had a little bit more of something going for him after the age of like 29, I think he would have a better case for the Hall of Fame. But because of the way both of those guys kind of peaked early and late in their careers, I don't think they're deserving of the Hall of Fame, unfortunately. And in segment number 3, I'll give you my final few players from the 2024 ballot who I don't think are deserving of the Hall of Fame class in this year's 2024 Hall of Fame. Probably said Hall of Fame too many times there. All right, let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. If you like the show, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now let's wrap up the podcast and let me give you my final three categories for players who I don't think are deserving for this year's Hall of Fame class. The next category is elite defense, but the bat, not so much. I think the first guy in this category is Torrey Hunter, who had himself a great career. I think from a personality standpoint, Hall of Fame personality, Hall of Fame guy, but the bat I just don't think was good enough. He never had a 30 home run season. He never had a 25 stolen base season. His career OPS is 793. Part of the reason it's below 800 is because of the longevity of his career, but he only had like 2 seasons with an 850 OPS. Like, Torrey Hunter was a really good player, a player that everyone would want, a player that everyone would want. 2020 kind of guy, 270 average, 800 OPS, could get you 100 ribbies, Gold Glover every single season, a perfectly well balanced player. I just don't think his ceiling as a player is on that Hall of Fame level. I just think he's like a rung below that. No disrespect to Torrey, multiple time All-Star, wherever he went, success followed. But I just look at the peak of what he is as a player. I just think it's like that tier 2 guy, really, really good championship level player, but Hall of Fame level player, I just don't think so. And then the other guy is Brandon Phillips, who is maybe has the best defensive highlight reel of all time. Every morning on SportsCenter when I woke up for school and I was watching the top 10 plays, I felt like Brandon Phillips had a defensive highlight like every single morning. But the issue is when you look at the offensive stats for Brandon Phillips, his career OPS only 740. He does have 130 home run season, but not many seasons above 20. Speedster early in his career, but the bat just wasn't there. The glove, definitely Hall of Fame glove, defensively elite, but I just don't think the bat was good enough. His bat definitely wasn't as good as even a Torrey Hunter, and his glove probably wasn't as good as a Torrey Hunter as well. Brandon Phillips, really good guy, but I don't see him making it to this year's Hall of Fame, unfortunately, for Brandon Phillips, and I think he's going to be a one and done on this year's ballot. The next category for me, longevity argument. These are the guys who I think are only on this ballot because of how long they were able to stay in the majors. The first guy, Omar Vizquel. I am so upset that he's like trending upward on the Hall of Fame ballot. Like, Omar Vizquel broke into Major League Baseball in 1989 and retired in 2012. He played 24 years and he was a 3-time All-Star. So it's not like he didn't have any skill, but a career 688 OPS, only one season with an OPS above 800. Like, for a lot of his career, he was just like a stopgap shortstop that people put over there because he was elite defensively. But a lot of times they were like, he just abridged the next guy, or he's a solid hold me down for now. We could have him there for a few seasons, but no one's like, this is a core foundational piece. Like, no one looked at Omar Vizquel as a building block. No one, when they acquired Omar Vizquel, was like, oh my God, we got a superstar player in the building. Like, he played elite defense, a lot of Gold Gloves on his resume, some speed early in his career, could run the bases, but the bat, again, another dude where the bat is just not there. I think if he didn't play 24 years in the majors, I don't think he would be on the Hall of Fame ballot. Same with Bartolo Colon, who I actually think had a higher ceiling than Omar Vizquel, considering he won a Cy Young Award. But Colon, a career 4.12 ERA, he just had too many seasons where he was like not very good. Like, the year right after he won the Cy Young, he only made 10 starts, but in those 10 starts, a 5.11 ERA. Then the very next year, he made 18 starts, 6.34 ERA. Like, the whole second half of Bartolo's career, he was basically like a 4.5, 4.6 ERA kind of guy. We all love Big Sexy, one of the best nicknames in the sport. Everyone loved it when Bartolo Colon went yard with the New York Mets at the ripe age of whatever it was, like 42 years old, 43 years old. I think it was in 2016 he did that. Bartolo Colon was a lot of fun throughout his career. At the age of 43 in 2016, he was an all-star, 3.43 ERA, 191 innings pitched. Colon, great guy to have around, jumped all around so many different teams. I don't know if you guys ever play Immaculate Grid, but Bartolo Colon, one of the fan favorites to use in that game, pitched 21 seasons. I just don't think he was an elite enough pitcher to be put in the Hall of Fame. Then the last category here is workhorse, but not scary as a number one. These are two pitchers who I think year after year could give you 200 innings pitch and was a frontline guy, but didn't strike fear in me as a number one starter. James Shields and Mark Burley, I think they're kind of cut from the same cloth. James Shields was a phenomenal pitcher for the Tampa Bay Rays and had some good seasons with the Kansas City Royals to help that franchise as well. But James Shields was someone who every single season, 200 innings, 200 innings pitch minimum. I think that was his greatest strength. But as the number one guy, I was not as scared of a James Shields as maybe even his own teammate, David Price. Now, don't get me wrong. James Shields, absolute stud. That one season, 2011, finished third in Cy Young voting, but that was also the only year he was ever an all-star, a one-time all-star making to the Hall of Fame. I just don't think is feasible. He did have 11 complete games in 2011 with 4 shutouts. Absolutely insane. Actually, who won the Cy Young Award in 2011? Because to have 11 complete games is kind of crazy. Justin Verlander won the MVP and the Cy Young Award that season, so that makes sense. Justin Verlander had himself a phenomenal year that year. Jared Weaver finished second in Cy Young voting that season, but James Shields, elite pitcher. I just don't think I was ever scared of James Shields as a number one guy. And the same with Mark Burley, who I think probably had a little bit lower of a ceiling than James Shields. Again, 200 innings every single season. Literally, if you look at his career, he pitched 16 years, and 14 of them he went 200 innings. And the final season of his career, 198.2 innings pitched. So definition of a workhorse, but also a career 3.81 ERA. I think Mark Burley was a guy who was a really, really, really good pitcher. Number 2, low end number 1. I was just never scared of Mark Burley. If he was your number 1 guy, Burley, I was just not that scared of him. Same with the James Shields. Guys, both of them are studs, but I just think there was guys like Verlander and Scherzer who I don't think they were on the same level as those guys. So for that reason, I would have to keep both Burley and James Shields out of my Hall of Fame. And with that being said, Pettit, Batista, Jose Reyes, Torrey Hunter, Brandon Phillips, Omar Vizquel, Bartolo Colon, James Shields, and Mark Burley. I apologize, but you would not be getting Hall of Fame ballots from me in the year of 2024. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back later in the week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.